Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to give a couple of seconds for people to file into the room. So if you need to make one quick run out to the good old Wisconsin bubbler or water fountain, whichever you prefer, to fill up before we get started, now is your chance. Okay. Uh, Looks like we've got a good number of people starting to matriculate in. So we will get started with AI for nonprofits, smarter strategy and stronger impact, brought to us by Ashley Storck of Marketini Media. Before we get the webinar really in full swing, just a couple of reminders for everybody. We are recording the webinar, and the recording of the webinar will be distributed to all of our attendees via email in the next couple of days once we get editing done. And as always, we do use the Q&A function for questions and answers. Please submit any questions you have for Ashley with the Q&A function, and we will warehouse those and get them answered towards the end of the webinar for you today. With that, I'd like to thank you formally for joining. I'm Peter Benson with Park Bank, Senior VP of our Treasury Services, and I'm very pleased to turn this over to our AI expert, Ashley Storck. Ashley, thank you for joining us. I look forward to hearing what you've got to share.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Peter. Really appreciate that introduction. Thank you so much to Park Bank for having me, and to all of you for being here and spending your morning with us. Today we're going to be diving into the topic of AI, which is a super hot topic at the moment and has been for the past couple of years. So I'm really excited to dive in specifically to AI for nonprofits and how it can help you have smarter strategies for a stronger impact. So, my name's Ashley Storck, CEO and founder of Marketini Media. We are a remote marketing firm that specializes in digital marketing. And before we really get into the nitty-gritty today, just want to do a quick overview of what you can expect from the presentation. So, overall, really the goal of today is to identify how artificial intelligence can help save you time, raise more money, and serve your communities better. So, where we're going to start out is with a brief introduction to artificial intelligence, kind of its past and where we're at today. Then we're going to take a look at some important distinctions, just understanding kind of in the world of AI, what is the different terminology, and for beginners or more intermediate people, what are those general terms that you want to understand before diving into the world of AI. We're then going to take a look at some security and ethical concerns of leveraging artificial intelligence, which is very important for anyone utilizing AI, but especially those in the nonprofit space. And similarly, we're going to take a look at the environmental impact of AI. This is something that has definitely become a larger topic of conversation surrounding the widespread use of artificial intelligence. So we're going to take a look at the environmental impact, but we're also going to kind of level set with what is the environmental impact of your specific AI use so that it's not necessarily something that is keeping you back from leveraging these tools. And then with that, where we're at in this day and age, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of AI tools. So we're going to take a look at which is best for you and your organization. And then we'll actually really get into the nitty-gritty of setting that artificial intelligence foundation and taking a look at what it means to prompt engineer effectively. And then once we really have created that foundation, we're going to take a look at some specific nonprofit AI use cases that ideally after today you can bring back to your organization and start implementing. Then we'll wrap up just with some closing thoughts, really what Marketini sees as the future of AI specifically in Wisconsin. And then we'll take a look at any questions that were submitted through chat and make sure that we get those answered for you. So with that, before we dive into all of that great stuff, I'm sure why you're all here today is to learn a little bit more about me. So I'm a passionate Wisconsinite, born and raised, graduated from UW-Madison in 2020. After graduating, I actually managed or managed marketing for BP's West Coast convenience store brand AMPM, where I was running a $50 million marketing budget. Realized very quickly that I did not want to spend the rest of my life in corporate America and founded Marketini Media up in Sister Bay. We really differentiate ourselves by using data-driven strategies to generate return on investment, and we exclusively support Wisconsin businesses and nonprofits. So we have really big passion for our local community. And we do this through strategies, consulting, and management packages. And some of our exciting previous partnerships were with the White House, having introduced President Biden at his student loan forgiveness event last April here in Madison. PBS Wisconsin, the Middleton Chamber of Commerce, and dozens more. My heart really lies in the work that I do with nonprofits, so I'm really excited to be here with you all today. So with that, now you're actually all here today, is let's dive into AI. So starting with a brief history of artificial intelligence, believe it or not, goes all the way back to ancient Greek civilization. So something I often say is, while it is such a hot topic now, started a couple years ago, people tend to forget how much artificial intelligence is in our daily life and has been for decades at this point. So starting back from ancient Greece, we then get into really AI emergence in the mid 20th century. Then we get into deep learning generative models in the late 2000s and really saw advancements in GPT and AI art starting in 2017. So really think of artificial intelligence as algorithms that understand patterns and features before generating new original creations. So that's really when we're thinking about generative AI creating something new. So where we're at today, artificial intelligence has a ton of capabilities. So these are just the surface level of some of the uses. So think fundraising, creativity, HR, efficiency, strategy, marketing, operations, and so much more. There's specific tools for all of these efforts, or some of the tools we'll talk about today, you can leverage kind of across these different efforts that you are looking to deploy in your organizations. Marketini Media actually talked with Representative Doyle, who's on the governor's task force for workforce and artificial intelligence. And he said, if you're not looking at ways to utilize AI, you're going to get run over by your competitor. And while we are in the nonprofit space, you might not necessarily look at your nonprofit peers as competitors. Just know that there's others in the space, there's other organizations that are utilizing artificial intelligence. So you should ensure that you're up to speed with these tools to make sure that you're as efficient as your peers. So now that we've really kind of set the stage for where we started and where we are today, we're going to take a look at some of these key distinctions between the terminology. So artificial intelligence. This is really kind of what all the buzz is about. So AI simulates human intelligence in machines to learn and solve problems. Really think as artificial intelligence as encompassing all of these following terms that we're going to talk about. So it's a broad term, again, encompassing all forms of that machine intelligence. So we have machine learning, generative AI, large language models like ChatGPT, and many more. So again, artificial intelligence really encompasses what we're going to discuss next. Machine learning, on the other hand, is an AI subset. So this is really using algorithms to analyze data, learn, and predict. ML's focus is on data-driven learning and predictions, and that's really what differentiates it from general AI and those specialized models. So machine learning that I'm sure you're all are very familiar with is when you log into your Netflix account and you have a recommended movie or a recommended show based on your previous watches. So really think of machine learning as those algorithms analyzing data to learn and then predict based on that prior experience. Then we have generative AI. So this is AI tech that can actually produce various content. Think text, imagery, audio, video, synthetic data. It analyzes data to find patterns and then it makes those predictions. So difference between generative AI and machine learning is generative AI is actually focusing on creating that new data that resembles the training data that was done with the machine learning. So it's all kind of flowing through to ultimately get to generating that new content. And then that's where we land with ChatGPT. So ChatGPT is a language model by OpenAI that generates that human-like text. ChatGPT is an example of generative AI. most of the AI that you'll be using is most likely a form of generative AI. Unlike AI or ML, ChatGPT again focuses on generating that human-like text based on its training data and those user inputs. So you can kind of see how this all flows. Again, artificial intelligence kind of encompassing all of this, machine learning, really creating that data-driven learning and predictions, and then generative AI actually producing that new content. Ideally, that's about the most technical we get today, so hopefully everyone's still with me. This is by no means something that you need to understand to be able to leverage these tools appropriately, but it kind of sets the stage for what we're working with and how generative AI ultimately creates this new content that you're looking to use the tools for. So. So now that we've really laid the foundation for where we're at with AI, kind of those key distinctions between terminologies, something that is going to be very important if you have yet to start using AI or if you're currently using AI is security and ethics. So we really break this down into 5 pillars. First and foremost is transparency. I am from the stance that it is very important to be transparent internally and externally if your organization is utilizing artificial intelligence. With that, it's very important to ensure that your team, your employees are leveraging artificial intelligence in a responsible and safe way. So, with this, definitely recommend creating some type of AI policy to ensure that all of your team members are using it appropriately and that there's kind of this set standard across your organization. Next is social engineering. One downfall of ChatGPT is it likes to tell you what you want to hear. So you can end up kind of in this feedback loop that is just producing this confirmation bias. So just be aware of that when you are corresponding with ChatGPT, that it might continue to kind of agree with what you're saying and create that confirmation bias. So it's very important, I always say, to be that human intermediary between the content ChatGPT is producing and posting that to the public. Use ChatGPT to create drafts, to brainstorm, but it should never be a copy and paste. You should always be that human intermediary to make sure that you're fact checking things are correct before you're ultimately sharing that wherever you may be. Third, very important, especially in the nonprofit space, sensitive data exposure. I always say if it isn't something that you would type into a Google search bar, it isn't something that you should put into a ChatGPT prompt. So understanding that if there's confidential information, never put that into ChatGPT. You should not be sharing that because you have the potential for sensitive data exposure. As we just learned, generative AI is really trained based on input data. So the last thing you want is the larger model being trained on confidential information that you provided to it. Next is cyber criminals. Cyber attacks and cybersecurity has become more and more prevalent as we are in this digital day and age. So just understanding the importance of making sure that you aren't providing that sensitive data to these tools is going to be important, because the likelihood of a potential cyber attack to some of these tools or to some of that information is just higher and higher as technology continues to advance. And last is job displacement. And the reality is that artificial intelligence is changing the workforce landscape and what jobs look like. However, I like to say that you shouldn't be concerned about AI taking your job. You should be concerned about someone who knows how to leverage AI taking your job. So, with that, ensure that you are educated and understand how to use these tools. And rather than having this fear of AI, embrace that to make sure that you are a step above others in the space and that your organization as a whole is being as efficient as possible to make sure that you are less impacted by some of this technological advancement. So that really tackles security and ethics. So next we're going to dive into the environmental impact of AI. So I actually pulled what I saw as some of the most scary headlines from the internet surrounding the environmental impact of AI. But the reason I do this is I want to show you that yes, there is an environmental impact and it would be irresponsible to not talk about that. So we are going to talk about that, but then what we're going to dive into is what does your use of artificial intelligence look like as an impact on the environment? So let's start out with just ChatGPT as a whole. ChatGPT prompts consume enough electricity daily to power the Empire State Building for a year and a half. ChatGPT consumes almost 1 million bathfuls of water every day. A ChatGPT query takes 10 to 15 times the energy consumed by a standard Google search. Each ChatGPT prompt consumes around a half to 1.5 gallons of water. Now, let's be honest, all of that does not sound great, and you're probably asking, Ashley, why are you telling us to use these tools that are having such a large environmental impact? Well, the reality is there are hundreds of millions of ChatGPT users every single day. So let's break it down and get an understanding of what your individual AI use looks like as an impact on the environment. So, an important note here is AI should really be used intentionally and not excessively. And that's something that we're learning with all of this new information coming out about the environmental impact. You should really be thinking about using these tools to reduce waste, replacing those high energy or high waste tasks in your organization. But let's take a little bit deeper of a look again about an individual person's AI use and how that impacts the environment. So I found this really great table here that talks about energy consumption per ChatGPT query is really small compared to some of this everyday electricity use that we might not even be thinking of. So we have this typical ChatGPT query here in terms of the energy cost. And for example, using a laptop for 5 minutes, microwaving for 30 seconds, or just the average US household consumption per minute is extremely higher than that typical ChatGPT query. So I doubt a lot of us are thinking every time we click 30 seconds on the microwave, we're not necessarily thinking about the energy cost. So again, be aware, be intentional with your AI use, but understand that you could get probably a dozen ChatGPT queries for less energy than microwaving something for 30 seconds. In a similar vein, ChatGPT uses energy. It also uses water to cool its data centers. I don't typically talk about toilet water consumption in my presentations, but thought this was a good graphic to just kind of break down again your individual usage and how that's impacting the environment. So again, I'm sure most of us don't think about the amount of water that we're necessarily using every time we flush a toilet, but on average, that's 5 gallons to flush. So understanding that ChatGPT prompt on average, say, takes about 1 gallon. You can get 5 of those for that toilet flush. So again, not something I necessarily compare, but I think it helps really set the field for what we're expecting out of our ChatGPT usage in comparison to that impact that some of these everyday electricity use, water use looks like. So with this, really what I want to say is I don't want everything you're hearing about the environmental impact to hold you back from using these tools, but I do want you to use these tools intentionally and not excessively. I could probably do a whole presentation on the environmental impact and how to be more efficient and effective, but as we'll get through the presentation, you'll see that the frameworks and the structures that we use for prompt engineering are ideally getting you to use AI more intentionally, which will ultimately decrease the amount that you need to go back and forth with ChatGPT. So now that we've covered really the foundation, some security, ethical, environmental concerns, let's really dive into now what do these tools look like? What are the options that we have for our organization? So with hundreds, if not thousands of tools, how do you choose the right one for your organization? I'm going to start by recommending 3 tools. First and foremost, ChatGPT. Talked a lot already about ChatGPT, and that's really where we'll spend a lot of the rest of the presentation today is diving into prompt engineering and specifically leveraging ChatGPT. Then we have Microsoft Copilot. And then lastly, Google Gemini. So I'll walk through kind of why each of these are a recommendation and really a great place to start. So ChatGPT is great for everyday content creation. You can use it for social media posts, emails, blogs, grant drafts, donor letters, creating surveys. And what's really great about ChatGPT is it's easy to use, it's highly versatile. You can create a ton of different content or use it in a variety of different ways, and it's very accessible without a lot of tech expertise. So, again, if you're new to AI or relatively familiar, ChatGPT is a great place to start. Also, what's great about ChatGPT is it is a free tool that ultimately has a pro version. However, the free tool has a lot of capabilities, and most likely, if you're just getting started, you're going to have everything you need and more out of the free version of ChatGPT. Next, we have Microsoft Copilot. So, organizations that are currently utilizing Microsoft 365, this is going to be a great add-on for you as it's built into your familiar tools that you're already working with. So, think Word, Excel, Outlook. It's going to essentially be a plugin that allows you to be more efficient, saving you time without having to go between platforms. This is a paid add-on. However, your nonprofit might be eligible for some discounts. Then lastly, here we have Google Gemini. So you might be using Microsoft 365, but if instead you're using Google Workspace, Google Gemini is going to be great for you. Again, it's really integrated into the current systems in place. So think Google Docs, Gmail, Sheets. Again, you have that seamless integration, and it's free for most workspace nonprofits. They do have an advanced available at a cost, but again, always recommend starting with that free version, testing out the capabilities, and then if needed, taking advantage of those more advanced options within each of these tools. So ultimately, there are thousands of different AI tools that you could use for your organization. But oftentimes I see people struggling to get started with AI because they don't know where to start tool-wise. And what I will say is start with ChatGPT. It is so versatile. It's what I personally use on a daily basis. Full transparency, it's the only AI tool I use, which might shock some people, but for me, it does what I need to do. It's extremely versatile. I pay for my one pro subscription and I can be extremely efficient, save a ton of time, and create a lot of content. So, again, don't let choosing what tool that you want to use hold you back from actually starting to experiment with some of this AI technology. Great. So now that we have really a strong foundation now of the tools that we're utilizing, we're going to dive more deeply into specifically leveraging ChatGPT and creating these specific prompts through prompt engineering. So one thing that we focus a lot on here at Marketini is the importance of prompt engineering, and this is going to help you be more efficient, be more effective, and get better responses from ChatGPT. One thing to note is you can use this prompt framework, and you should use this prompt framework across generative AI tools. So even if you aren't using ChatGPT, it's going to be important to have these key components of your structure to ensure that you are being as effective as possible with these tools. So this is the structure that Marketini has developed, and it consists of three components. So we have action, framework, specifications. Action is an action verb to direct and contextualize the chatbot's response. Framework is a familiar imitative structure for the chatbot to iterate. And specifications are additional details to personalize and guide outputs. So here we have an example of a very basic structure, but it ultimately has these three components. So our action is write. Our framework is a blog post intro paragraph, and our specifications are the benefits of giving to local nonprofits. So whenever you're going to communicate with ChatGPT, I recommend starting with this basic structure to ensure you have an action, framework, and specifications. Again, this is going to help you be more efficient, and then on the other side of things, ideally get you a stronger response. taking this a step further, we have our general structure, but as you become more familiar with the tools, as you become more efficient and want to ultimately create better responses, we've also created kind of these top 5 tips for prompt engineering to really take those prompts to the next level. One of my favorites that we start out here with is using imagine in your prompts. So this is actually something that would come before that structure that we just laid out on the previous slide. And it would be asking AI to behave as if it were a type of person, typically an expert, a process, or an object. So in the case of Marketini Media, depending on what project I'm working on, I might say, imagine you're a social media marketing expert with a specialization in the real estate industry. So this really helps to set the stage for what you're expecting in a response from ChatGPT and is a great way to make your prompt that much stronger. Next, we have context. So this would actually come beneath that structure that we laid out on the previous slide. So whereas imagine would come before, context would come after. So really what this is doing is being specific about the wider context of the output you want to produce for those better results. So we have that specifications piece. We have our action, our framework, the specifications. Really think of the context as like specifications continued, like any additional detail that you want to include to get the most accurate and strongest response possible. Next, we have building on previous prompts. Something that's often overlooked with chatbots like ChatGPT is the fact that you are able to have a conversation. So if you submit your first prompt, you get a response, and you want to build off that, you don't have to start from zero. Respond and build off that initial prompt. This will help you iterate faster projects like a business or a marketing plan. Because if you start with this large prompt of asking for a marketing plan, most likely, as I mentioned, it's going to be a rough draft. It's not going to be something that's ready to go. But once you have that outline created from your first prompt, you can really build on that, say, to create a detailed social media plan, a detailed email marketing plan, whatever it may be. So remember to treat this like a conversation. And in a similar vein, remembering that this is a conversation, make sure to correct chat's errors and give feedback. So if you are ever getting a response that's inaccurate, or the format, or just the way in which it's responding to you is not something you are aligned with, or not something that is up to your standards, give that feedback, correct errors, communicate as if ChatGPT is a teammate you're working with on a project. Again, often overlooked that you can have this conversation, so it's important to treat it that way. Last thing, one of my favorites actually is asking ChatGPT to create your prompts, or just asking ChatGPT what it needs to fulfill the ask that you have. So one great thing here is if you're just getting started with AI, specifically ChatGPT, and you're like, I have this framework, but I just still don't really know where to begin. Say you want to ultimately create a social media marketing plan for your nonprofit. Ask ChatGPT what it needs from you to do so, and it'll create a list of questions that you can then submit your answers and ideally get a much more robust response. So if you're ever stuck, ask ChatGPT what it needs. And one of my favorite things to do, especially when working on that larger documentation, is from the get-go saying, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. What do you need from me in order to do so? And ideally, you end up with a more robust response from the get-go, asking ChatGPT exactly what it needs to fulfill your query. Great. So now that we've taken a look at really what that basic structure looks like, and then some of these top 5 tips for prompt engineering, I just wanted to show you an example of how robust a prompt could be before you ever even begin working with ChatGPT. So this is an example just for Dane by Local, a local business organization. And I just wanted to show you kind of where we started with that very basic structure, and kind of where you can take your prompts with some of these prompt engineering tips. So in this case, we use that imagine prompt tip. So imagine you're a fundraising expert, a business expert, and a nonprofit organization expert with a deep knowledge of the business and fundraising ecosystem of the greater Madison region. So that's our imagine. We then have that standard prompt structure outline as our action, donor engagement and retention plan as the framework, and then for Dane by Local, a local business organization that educates the public, promotes local member businesses, and collaborates with similar organizers. That is our specifications. Another tip we're using in this prompt is our context. So we have our specifications, but let's take that to another level. As a fundraising professional in the greater Madison region, I will use this donor engagement and retention plan to craft more personalized communications, foster engagement opportunities, and retain key organizational donors. So you can see how we start still with that action framework specifications, but using those imagine and context tips make this prompt much more robust. And as you can imagine, we would get a much different response from just using this standard framework versus using this imagine and this context framework in as well as that standard framework. So by no means do I expect you to start here, but I just wanted to show you kind of how you can take that standard structure and build upon it with some of those prompt engineering tips. Great. So with that, we'll get into actual examples that ideally you can take back and use at your organization, or ideally take back the structure of these prompts and switch out kind of what you're looking for in terms of a response or a deliverable, but really wanted to give you 5 specific use cases that you could take back and apply to your organization as soon as possible. So fundraising is where we started, which I'm sure is very top of mind for all of you in this room. So in this example, we're asking ChatGPT to write a compelling 300-word annual appeal letter. So again, thinking back to our structure, write is our action. A compelling 300-word annual appeal letter is our framework. And then you're going to put in your nonprofit that provides, put in a description of your nonprofit. And then we're giving more specifications here. The tone should be warm, urgent, and mission-driven, include an emotional hook, a clear call to action, and show how donations make a tangible impact. One thing, if you are leveraging ChatGPT Pro, is it has the capability of surfing the web. So what you could actually do here when doing the brief description of services is including a link to your website. That way it could actually scan content on your website to provide you with an even stronger response. So this is a great fundraising example. One thing, it's gotten a little better, but just a heads up, ChatGPT struggles to count a little bit in terms of word count. So it'll typically get you pretty close to the word count that you give it. But again, always be that human intermediary. Use this as a rough draft and ensure that it's good to go before sending out the final version to the public. Great. So next we have a grant writing example. So this is an example of a prompt where you use that imagine tip here. So imagine you're an expert grant writer. Develop a strong response to the following grant question. Describe your organization's mission and how this project aligns with it. Again, insert your nonprofit, insert your mission, and then provide brief project summary. This is another example where we also use that context. So context here should be in the form of a professional and persuasive paragraph. In this example, you probably could have used that context as just some additional specifications, but what's great about pulling context out of that main prompt is if you really want ChatGPT to pay attention to what you're saying. Like, we need this to be professional, persuasive, and it must be in paragraph format. You're pulling that out as context to really deem that a necessary step for ChatGPT to make sure it's accomplishing with its response. Similar to the ability to surf the web, ChatGPT allows you to actually upload documentation. So if you have like a one-pager about your nonprofit, your mission, or this specific project that you're looking to get grant funding for, you're actually able to upload documents so that rather than kind of copying and pasting a bunch of text into context, you can actually provide it with additional documentation to review. Important note there as we think about security concerns, making sure that any documentation you're uploading does not have confidential information is going to be very important when leveraging that function of ChatGPT. Great. Next, we have marketing specifically surrounding content planning. So, working with a lot of nonprofits, I know that everyone is constantly wearing a lot of hats, and typically marketing is one of those. So, how can we make your marketing, content planning, and content creation more efficient? So, in this example, we're using that Imagine piece again. Imagine you're a social media expert, create a 4-week social media content plan to promote our upcoming fundraising event. Insert your event. The event is, put in your description, include post ideas, timing, and calls to action. So again, this is a great example where if you have an event page on your website and you're utilizing Pro ChatGPT, we can absolutely include the URL to have it surf the web that way. And then also, if you were to have documentation surrounding the event, you could also upload that. Now, I couldn't help myself but include another marketing example because I am a marketer at heart. So, the last example was content planning. Now, I want to show you actually what you could do in terms of content creation. So, it's one thing to plan out the content, but it's another thing to actually create it. So, this is an example here about social media captions. So, create an engaging social media caption under 150 words to promote into your nonprofit mission of insert your mission and highlight our impact. Make it friendly, inspiring, and include a call to action like donating, volunteering, or sharing. This is a great example of a space that you can use ChatGPT to create a variety of marketing content. In this example, it's a social media caption, but it'd be very easy to swap out social media caption for newsletter blurb, blog post, whatever it may be. So understand that marketing, content planning, content creation can be used across your marketing channels, and it's just a matter of crafting your prompts appropriately. Great. So next we have event logistics. So this is a little different than some of the other prompts that we've looked at so far. So in this example, also using that Imagine. So imagine you're an event coordinator, create a detailed day of run of show for our upcoming event. You include your event name, date, brief description, include a timeline with setup, registration, program segments, transitions, and teardown with time blocks and roles assigned. Now, I would say this is an example of a prompt that if you were to just put it in like this, you're probably going to get a relatively vague response. It will most likely almost produce more of like a run of show outline for you rather than necessarily having all the details it needs to create this full document. So this is a great example when we think like larger documentation, standard operating procedures, going back to some of those top 5 prompting tips where I said to actually ask ChatGPT what it needs from you. This would be a great example of saying, imagine you're an event coordinator, you need to create a detailed day of run of show for the upcoming event. What information do you need in order to create a timeline, registration, program setups, transitions, teardown, time blocks, roles assigned, etc. It'll produce a list of questions. You can produce a list of answers. And then ideally, that end response you're getting is going to be much more robust and in line with the deliverable that you're looking for. So again, a great tip to leverage when you're creating more robust documentation is actually going to be kind of starting out with asking ChatGPT what it needs from you in order to produce said document. Then the last one here we have is storytelling, which is very important to the nonprofit space. So this example here, we have write a short impact story, 200 to 250 words, we can use in insert a nonprofit's newsletter or grant report. The story should highlight a real or representative client who benefited from our insert program or service, focusing on their journey, challenges they overcome, and the role our organization played. And typically I like to use context when I'm providing like a much longer list of kind of additional specifications. So in this case, you could put the details of the story in the context, or as I previously mentioned, if you have a document that has the story on it, uploading it that way. Again, important note here, wanting to ensure you're not uploading any confidential information. In the case of storytelling, obviously always making sure that you have permission from the person whose story you're sharing. But that really wraps up the specific use cases that Marketini has put together for nonprofits. Again, really use these as a base, but understand that you can pull out and plug in whatever words, deliverables, end results that you're looking for. But these are really meant to be a base for you to experiment with, to see what type of responses that you can get from ChatGPT, and ultimately, ideally, learn from these to be as efficient as possible and be really intentional with how you're using these tools. So with that, going to wrap up today with the future of generative AI here in Wisconsin. So, almost 2 years ago to the day, Marketini Media did its first artificial intelligence presentation. So at this point, there is even more widespread adoption now than there was then. So we're definitely seeing increased use across nonprofits, for profits to do a variety of tasks, specifically enhanced donor engagement, fundraising efficiency. So I will say if you're not using AI today, you better be using it tomorrow because 2 years ago, people were already leveraging these tools. Next, we're definitely going to see some advancements in creativity, kind of continued advancements. One thing I will say is maybe where AI, generative AI specifically, is lacking a bit is in the form of specifically like marketing materials in terms of like graphics. So, being a marketer myself, I would absolutely love, and I envision that Canva is very getting close to having something ready for this, is you have your brand kit in Canva with your colors, your fonts, your logos. Let's input that, give our event details, and have Canva actually create that graphic with relevant imagery and whatnot. So I envision that there's going to be a lot of advancements specifically in the creativity space on that end. So keep an eye out specifically if you're leveraging Canva. There should be a lot of opportunities there. I believe Magic Studio is what it's called that they're working on. Next, ethical and regulatory development. So this is definitely something we're seeing and hearing. So whether it's at local, state, or federal level, um, there's most likely going to be regulations, policies in place surrounding AI use, whether it's your personal or professional. So understanding that there are going to be these probably policy and governmental developments is something to keep an eye on and is going to be important from your organization standpoint. Next is local economic impact. We're definitely seeing a change in technological innovation and how that's affecting different sectors here in Madison. So, again, knowing that these tools are being used, let's start to take advantage of them now because if we just keep pushing it off and have a fear of kind of embracing these tools, you're just going to start getting further and further behind as others in the space continue to excel. Last, we have personalized experiences. So, as I mentioned kind of at the beginning of the presentation, talking about how much AI is in our daily life and we might not have even realized it. A lot of the personalization that we're seeing and have seen, whether it's email marketing, social media, whatever it may be, is done through artificial intelligence and machine learning. So, this is just going to get more and more popular, especially from a nonprofit perspective, wanting to ensure that you're providing a personalized, personable, emotional experience to whoever you're serving, the community, your donors, whoever it may be. It's going to be more and more important to have those personalized experience and have that personal touch. As I mentioned, you should never be copying and pasting from AI to the public. You always want to be that human intermediary and always ensure that you have that personalization so that it doesn't feel like your messaging is coming from a robot. But with that, that really wraps up the conversation surrounding AI, specifically for nonprofits working smarter strategies to be more efficient. And like I said, if you're not using AI today, you better be using it tomorrow. Otherwise, you're going to get behind as we saw 2 years ago. Things are continuing to progress. So thank you all so much for your time, and thank you so much to Park Bank for having me. Really appreciate the space to give this presentation.
Ashley, thank you for joining us and for sharing this with us. This is you gave everybody a lot of very specific information. One thing that really kind of struck me is it feels like this field is changing very rapidly, like very day by day, but it's clearly been in the works a long time, and I don't think people kind of realize that. And you really brought that home with that first slide.
Yep,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Um, with that, I'm going to jump into some of the Q&A here.
Yeah.
Helen is wondering if you have any suggestions for people looking to find acceptable or decent sort of AI governance and use policies. Where should they start looking?
That is a great question. So I'm an advocate in terms of it was the government question specifically.
More about just a general AI use policy, I think, for
Or
the
like a
organization.
general AI use policy. That is a great question, and honestly might be worth me sending a follow-up to see if there's someone in this space who I'm sure there are organizations at this point that really prioritize creating AI policies specific for your organization. I'm sure if you go online, there's some templates, but I would definitely recommend working with a professional to have that done. Probably even some HR professionals might be getting into that space. So might be worth a follow-up if you want to shoot me an email. I might have some connections in the AI space after I do a little digging that could specifically help with that. But I would recommend working with a professional to have that done just to make sure everything's all the boxes are checked in that respect.
That totally makes sense. Yes, I have seen some HR professionals starting to put these out and have them
Yep.
available for people, and even attorneys like a
Mm. Lawyers as
attorneys in
well.
that HR
Yep,
space. Yeah.
absolutely.
Reagan has a detailed question here. She's wondering what your thoughts are on using the different GPTs that might be out there. For example, like grant writing GPT. Are there advantages or disadvantages of one over the other? Um, and do some of these maybe kind of work with Chat GPT to pull information across?
Yeah, so I guess I'm not familiar with ChatGPT specifically having a generalized, let's see, yeah, or I guess maybe that's a newer thing. So in terms of do they work across, so if it's specifically like the ChatGPT program, then yes, they're all pulling from the same learning. In terms of kind of what are the advantages, disadvantage of using like industry specific ChatGPTs, again, I don't want that to get in the way of you actually using the tool. So I find it easy to just utilize your standard ChatGPT to do your grant writing, to do your marketing. And if you have pro, you're able to have different conversations. So you could essentially create a grant writing conversation, a marketing conversation, a standard operating procedure conversation, and it all be in one place. So if it is specifically ChatGPT, yes, they're all pulling from the same space. But if it's not a specific ChatGPT program, then no, they might be pulling from different machine learning.
Okay, I think that to me that makes sense. I
Okay.
think yeah, I think you're right there. But again, you know a lot more about AI than I do.
Yep, yep. Yeah, so if it is ChatGPT specific, yes, it is pulling, but the same content. But if it is a different AI tool, then it is possibly pulling from a different data pool.
Awesome. One of the things have heard about for a while now are the potential biases that exist in all of the programming that these machine learning and everything is built on. James is wondering if you have any recommendations about how an organization, maybe with little expertise, should go about asking the right questions to understand what they need to know about the biases so that they can disclose the funders and that sort of.
Yeah, yeah. So that was something we talked about in that kind of security and ethic concern is you can kind of be in this positive feedback loop. So a lot of it starts with your prompt engineering. So, just like a very basic example of rather than saying, like, is this a good idea? Like asking, what are your thoughts surrounding this idea? So, you never want to position kind of a question to get ChatGPT to respond in a certain way. So, that's just kind of a basic kind of prompt engineering standpoint that you can come from is making sure that you're not positioning your question in a way for the answer that you want to hear. In terms of being transparent to donors or whatever that looks like. So, Marketini, when we work with our clients, our client contract explicitly states that we utilize artificial intelligence in our work. So, if there is documentation, I recommend being as transparent as possible. Might make more sense to bring a lawyer, HR representatives into that conversation to identify where does it make sense to make people aware that we're using these technologies, where is it not necessarily relevant to include some of that language.
Okay. Uh, I'm sorry if I mispronounce any names here. Looks like Tiana is wondering, are there softwares that can tell if something was written with Chat GPT? Um,
So technically they would say yes. However, I've done some experimenting on my own of actually utilizing some of the technologies that are supposed to catch if something was written with AI. I wrote a full blog post with AI. I put it into one of these technologies and it said that it wasn't. So I think those became really popular, like in the education space, trying to mitigate people utilizing artificial intelligence that way. But what they found is the tools weren't very accurate in actually determining whether or not something was written with AI. So, yes, there are technologies. However, how accurate they are and how much they should be relied upon, I would be very apprehensive about.
Fair point. Thank you. And Fernando is wondering if Chat GPT is good with other languages. Are there specific languages that it is really good with?
Yes, so in terms of specific languages, that's a great question. I believe Spanish, you can do Spanish with ChatGPT. Other languages, I am not 100% sure. I'm sure that is something they're working towards. I do believe you can do some work in Spanish. However, there are some limitations. So I would assume that's definitely something they're looking to improve, but might be a good follow-up for me to look more into that because that's a great question.
Excellent. Thank you. Um, I generally reserve the right to ask a question at these, and I'm going to invoke that right now. As somebody who has used these tools and has experience with them, um, do you think that nonprofit boards should start to consider their composition differently? Do they need to, instead of just looking for people with fundraising and finance and marketing and legal experience, do they need to be looking for somebody with experience either programming AI or, some sort of programming expertise, maybe philosophical expertise around things?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I would say absolutely. I think this is, as we saw again, 2 years ago was the first time we were doing this presentation, and things have only continued to grow, and it's becoming more and more prevalent, hundreds of millions of users every day, and it has shown to extremely increase efficiency. So if you have someone on your board that's able to have a competency in this space, I would say that that is something, if I was building a board, I would definitely look for because it's just going to help your board be more productive. And then ultimately, they're going to be a great resource for the larger organization to help you implement these tools and get that efficiency out of them. So I might be a little biased, but I would say yes.
And maybe a follow-up, do you think that if the best candidates is somebody who uses it, uh, or
I,
familiar?
I would say if you're not using, which it was kind of shocking. I was just recently in a call with a membership base, and only 23% of their membership base was using AI, and that was shocking to me. So I don't necessarily want to say it's a must-have because I think specifically in our community, a lot less people are using it than should be. However, I think someone should always be open to new technology and learning the new technologies. So I don't think it's like unnecessary, but there should be someone who is open to understanding, trying to learn and leverage these tools.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Um, and maybe one last one. How long would you estimate it took you to become sort of proficient using
That's a
ChatGPT?
That's a great question. So I've been using it for more than 2 years at this point. So that's why I really deem myself ChatGPT expert. I work in other AI tools, but ChatGPT is what I'm using every single day. I would say you can get efficient pretty quickly. So even if it's a matter of how consistent are you using it. So for me, starting and using it just about every day, even if it's not, again, being effective with how I'm using it, if you're consistently using it even for a month, you're going to get pretty efficient with it. I would say by the 6 month mark, you should feel very confident in leveraging artificial intelligence and knowing that your prompts are engineered in an effective way to give you great results. So it's a matter of consistency, learning how to engage with these tools and really using a lot of this prompt engineering. Because I think kind of the hardest part, and it's often overlooked, is the prompt engineering portion. Like it's essentially a Google search bar when you're working actually in the technology, but it's a matter of how do you speak to the chatbot to get those strong responses. And so that really goes back to the prompt engineering standpoint.
Excellent. Well, I know you have it up here, but if one more time you wouldn't mind reminding people how to get a hold of you if they'd like to learn more about what you do or how you could help them, uh, please feel
Yeah,
free.
absolutely. Yes, thank you all so much again. Ashley Storck with Marketini Media. Feel free to send me an email or reach out via form on our website. We do free 30-minute consults. We also have started doing specific AI presentations for organizations, for your specific team members, and also AI consulting and coaching for specific use cases in your organization. So if you're interested in how to actually bring AI into your nonprofit, would be happy to have a discussion with you about that. And thank you all again for your time today. Really appreciate it.
And thank you, Ashley. This has been fantastic, and I guarantee that the people attending got a lot of useful and practical information that they can take back and help start get AI use going in their organization if they aren't already. Thank you
Absolutely.
so much for sharing your expertise with us. It's been a delight.
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time.
Thanks. And thanks to all of our participants. Again, we will be sending out the recording of this webinar as soon as we can. And we hope you have an enjoyable rest of your day. Thank you very much.